I'm a marine biologist working for the Canadian Coast Guard, helping to investigate a series of shark attacks in and around Halifax Harbour. But I'm starting to think that it isn't a shark. Part 2 by Queen of the Dead 2023. Apologies for taking a while to get back to everyone. I've been waiting patiently for our vessel's hotspot to be set up. Now, on to the update. The following morning, after we had started the investigation, we were all separated into teams of 15 people per boat. Leading the charge was Dylan's boat, the CCGS Amity, a fishing vessel approximately 40 feet in length, painted in the telltale colours of the Canadian Coast Guard. The Amity had been Dylan's pride and joy, proudly serving the country for 30 years, and yet it was so well maintained that it still looked fresh off the shipyard. On board, the crew consisted of myself, Dylan, my wife Elaine, a marine paleontologist, who, among seeing the scale I had cut myself on, immediately volunteered to assist with the case however she could. Matt, a local news reporter on board to report our findings. Lawrence, a representative of Halifax City Hall sent with us upon request by the Mayor, and 10 others consisting of the Amity's crew. While we were quite a mix of ethnicity and cultures, my wife Ellen always caught plenty of attention. A beautiful New Zealander woman of half Māori descent, Ellen's kindness and sharp wit is always capable of making the hearts of every gender flutter with joy. Unfortunately, this seemed to draw the ire of Lawrence, a well-known skeptic of the paranormal who had the reputation of being a devout Catholic and an unpleasant bigot. It also didn't help that Lawrence, himself a pale Caucasian man, paler than myself, and I'm fairly pale, with the build and charm of a walking skeleton, frequently argued with several government higher-ups, including Dylan, about, and I quote, letting a pair of illegal, insert homophobic slur here, hold positions of power. Granted, I don't necessarily think that someone's ethnicity and who they love should matter when you're trying to hunt a man-eater, but that didn't stop Lawrence and Alan from immediately butting heads. You two seriously expect the Mayor to believe this to be more than just a rusted-over license plate? Lawrence's cold voice cut out through the quiet sounds of rolling waves as he glanced over the mysterious scale in the evidence bag between him and Alan. This rusted-over license plate, as you'd so much like it to be, Alan interjected with a bristle of annoyance, is indeed a scale according to my research, and according to my scale, that scale dates back to over 1 million years old. Now, unless you can somehow prove that the ancestors of Homo sapiens were building cars that long ago, quit questioning my work already. Well, maybe you should respect a little bit of fact-checking, young lady, the representative countered through his teeth, though before the argument could continue, Dylan decided to intervene. Oi, there won't be any more childish bickering on my ship, my boss shouted from the bow of the vessel. We've got an important job to do. If you ain't going to focus on our job and continue ripping at each other's throats, I'll send you both home. Lawrence took a moment to gather his bearings, clearly not used to being talked back to, before he said, Don't you think we should have someone more qualified than these two? You're looking to be thrown overboard with that attitude, Larry, the captain growled back in return. Alan and Jamie are far more qualified for their part than you and I, so don't be acting jealous that a couple of lovely lasses know more about the sea than you. At this point, while Lawrence was muttering some rather not nice words under his breath, Matt leaned towards me and politely inquired, Just how often does that happen? Too often to count, I replied earnestly, and then brought up my own question. How's your stomach holding up? The bespectacled man winced, remembering how, a few hours before, he had been rather seasick, as he said, Much better, thanks to the medicine you gave me for it. Thank you. There proceeded to be a variety of different conversations among everyone on board, and before long the Amity had reached the approximate spot on the water that a family of great whites were recently spotted. Coincidentally enough, this was also near where I had seen the fin cutting through the water. I had also been out here weeks before with Dylan, tagging some of the sharks to track their movements. He explained at some point on our way here that he wanted to check on the family since the data we had collected on them seemed off. "So, why again are we looking to find a family of sharks?" Matt piped up as we reached our destination. "The data that we've received from their tags is showing that they're behaving erratically," Dylan curtly replied as members of his crew started working to bring something up from the deck below. "We're giving them a welfare check to figure out what's going on. If one or more of them end up being Bruce, or if Bruce is causing them to react the way they've been, we'll know with a closer look." "What do you mean by a closer look?" Lawrence asked, his eyes lighting up in surprise when the object being pulled up, a shark cage, finally came into view. "You mean to tell me you're fucking sending people down in shark-infested waters in that thing?" "How do you think we tagged them?" I interjected, taking a moment to stretch before heading away from the cage. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm heading to my quarters to change. I'll be back." A few minutes later I returned, having traded out my uniform for a wetsuit and waterproof walkie-talkie, earning a raised eyebrow from Matt and Lawrence. "You sending her down there in the cage?" Lawrence grumbled, his judgmental eyes glaring in annoyance. "Without scuba gear?" Matt continued, his eyes filled with concern and curiosity. Dylan walked over to me and, with a pat on my shoulder, said, "Out of my whole crew, Jamie's got quite a few, shall we say, tricks up her sleeve that makes her perfect for going in the shark cage. She earned the code name Siren for a reason. In fact, I guess you could say that she's like a fish in the water." I rolled my eyes at his joke, a consistent running gag among the crew about the circumstances of my early years being odd and not quite human. I mean, to be fair, the jokes weren't entirely wrong. Dylan and I are both aware of that. As I climbed into the cage, I began to reminisce on how me and Dylan met all those years ago, long before I began my career. I was 6 years old when my birth parents were killed in a shipwreck off the coast of Nova Scotia. Not quite old enough to remember the circumstances of the wreck, or how long I'd been floating in the water alone, but old enough to remember the kind man in his mid-20s pulling me out of the water and resuscitating me with the help of his 7-year-old niece. It was clear to people right away that I wasn't exactly your average kid, since after all, your average 6-year-old doesn't sprout gills and webbed fingers and have their legs turn into a tail when you place them in a body of water. So growing up turned out to be quite unpleasant, to say the least. I got passed between several foster homes, each one a variety of good and bad, and all throughout my school years I couldn't escape the relentless teasing and references to a particular cartoon movie from the 90s. Thankfully for me, I came to acknowledge that I did still have someone in my corner. The very man who had rescued me from drowning, who let me stay with him and his family in between homes, who could have relied on good old nepotism to give me a job in the Coast Guard, but rather encouraged me to get my current position in my field the old-fashioned way. The same man, my boss Dylan, who 7 years ago had also encouraged me to ask his niece, my now wife, out on our first date. I was smiling thinking back at this as the cage lowered towards the water, taking a moment to look back up on deck as the others looked on. As soon as half of my body was submerged, I could see Lawrence and Matt's eyes widen in shock, while I felt the familiar changes occurring at the same time. "The actual fuck? I thought you meant the fish thing as a figure of speech," I heard the representative stammer in surprise. While I'd love to say what Dylan's likely response was, by the time he was about to speak, the cage was fully submerged in the water, leaving me to myself and the tranquility of the North Atlantic. After a few minutes of descending in silence, I pulled out the walkie-talkie and switched it on to get greeted by Matt's voice saying, "Come in, Jamie. This is the Amity. Over." "Roger that, Matt," I replied with a smirk as I began scouting for the family of great whites. "Hope I didn't give you a heart attack. Over." "Well, at least we know that siren is more than just a code name," the news reporter joked. "I'll be sure not to add that bit of information in the report, though maybe I should add in something about how much Larry's flipping out over certain revelations." Sure enough, over the sounds of the ocean I could hear the sounds of Lawrence's blabbering on about the existence of fish people in the background of the boat's side of the communication. Soon enough, I heard the sound of the walkie-talkie exchanging hands as Dylan took over communications on their end. "Alrighty, Jameson, have you seen anything yet?" Dylan inquired gruffly. "Not quite, honestly," I stated, as I noted how there didn't seem to be any sign of the sharks at that very moment, let alone any sign of marine life. "Have you seen any movement from the tags on the sonar?" There was a moment of silence before my boss replied. "Actually, strangely enough, I can't seem to locate them on the sonar at all. Let me know if you find anything." "Roger that. Maintaining radio silence for now," I declared, switching off the walkie as I swam gently around the edges of the cage, hoping to get a better view of the ocean around me. Just as it was quiet, however, I heard the voice again. It was a lot clearer this time around, since now I was in the water, and with that, I was able to identify that it sounded less androgynous and more feminine now, whereas before it was trying to guide me to the water, and now seemed to be trying to get my attention. "I know you can hear me," the mysterious voice echoed in my mind, but I tried my best to ignore it. Despite my best efforts, I hadn't been able to get help identifying the origins of the voice, or if it was even real. To be frank, it had become less scary and more of a nuisance over the past few days. "You can hear me, don't deny it," the voice grumbled in what sounded like irritation. "I don't know what the fuck you are, but as far as I'm aware, you're just a figment of my imagination." I finally decided to reply back to the voice. Can't you stay quiet for 5 minutes? I'm a little too busy to deal with your esoteric bullshit right now." Much to my surprise, my mysterious mind companion answered back with quite the bite to their words, and something I didn't entirely expect. "You don't have to be so rude, young child of the seas. I'm trying to help you. Look underneath you." Deciding to humour its advice, I glanced down towards the bottom of the shark cage, expecting nothing. However, something was indeed there that caught my attention. It appeared to be the shape of the sharks we were looking for, but something seemed a bit off. Radioing back in, I said, "Siren to Amity. I think I see something. Can you lower the cage down about 1 knot from the water's surface?" "Roger that, Jamie. Over and out," my boss replied, and before long I could see the shark cage lowering down further into the dark depths of the ocean. Making sure to swim down along with it, my eyes began to adjust as I went deeper and deeper down towards the shapes in the water. As I got closer, it occurred to me that the shapes weren't moving at all, and much to my absolute horror, it soon became clear why. "Hey boss," I barely managed to radio out, shaking in a mix of horror and pain. "The shark family. I found them. They're all dead." "Wait, what?" His voice echoed out in the murky waters. "You're serious?" I wouldn't joke about something like this, sir. You know that," I stammered out, choking on tears. "They're all accounted for, all 5 of them. Looks like they were attacked by something big. The sight of those bodies down there isn't something that I'm willing to describe in full, but having worked on cases involving great white sharks before and coming to appreciate a species that's deemed vulnerable, seeing an entire family of them alive the week before only to find them dead now is devastating. Even as I'm typing this part up now, thinking back to this still brings me to tears at the loss of life. Holding back my anguish for later, I began to examine the corpses, only for my blood to run cold the moment I noticed something and immediately radioed in. "Siren to Amity, we've got another problem," I worriedly radioed in, keeping my eyes out on the water. "The tags are gone. Whatever killed them, it ripped off their dorsal fins. Have you been able to relocate them yet?" "I'm checking the sonar now," Dylan replied, and I could hear him moving around. All the while, the mysterious voice seemed to be desperately trying to get my attention again, only for him to call out, "They're being picked up on the sonar again. Crap, if that's Bruce that killed those sharks, and is currently 50 feet down from your location, it's heading your way, and it's moving fast." Just then, several fish swam frantically right past the cage as if they were fleeing from something, and it soon became apparent what that something was, since almost immediately I could see a rather large shadow moving beneath me. With how dark it was, I could barely make out what appeared to be a rolling mass of coils several kilometers in length, and a pair of large ocean green eyes with serpentine pupils staring right back at me. Sure enough, the shape was approaching rapidly, way too fast for comfort. "Shit, pull me up now! Pull me up now!" I shouted into the walkie-talkie, right as the mysterious voice in my head was telling me to run. The cage began to ascend as fast as it could, but much to my dismay, the beast was gaining on me. While I still couldn't see it, I could make out its enormous jaws opening wide to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth the size of my forearm. Just as the seas began to slowly lighten up, those same jaws proceeded to clamp down on the shark cage and started to violently shake it. Through the water, I could make out the sounds of creaking as the Amity's crane was desperately fighting to bring the cage back on board, and the sounds of the shark cage straining to stay in one piece. All the while, up close and personal, I could hear the sounds of growling and hissing coming from the beast that I was now certain was the man-eater we were looking for. And now it was clearly trying to make me its next victim. Thinking quickly, I swam towards the door of the cage and reached through the bars to grab the door latch and began to pry it open. It only took 10 seconds to get it open, but those 10 seconds felt like the longest 10 seconds of my life. Each second I knew could have been my last, with Bruce's jaws closing further and further on the cage, causing serious dents in it. Just as the cage really began to crumble, I finally got the door open and swam out just in time, the beast's teeth just barely missing my tail. Moving quickly, I headed for the surface while Bruce was distracted trying to remove the pieces of what was left of the cage from its teeth. Dark blood leaking from where the cage had clearly cut its mouth. Very soon, I had breached the surface of the ocean and was quickly pulled out and onto the now very shaky Amity. The crew were desperately trying to pull the cage's remains back up from the depths, but were having a hard time. As soon as I had the chance, I rushed over to help, only to be stopped by a sudden lurch. The sound of snapping could be heard as the crane's steel rope proceeded to snap right in half. While the half attached to the shark cage was swiftly pulled into the depths, the other half went careening backwards into the air with the crane, sending the Amity into an almost vertical incline. It just barely managed to level out without breaking apart. However, it became clear right away that trouble was only just beginning. "Men overboard!" Dylan cried out, as sure enough, 2 members of the crew had been thrown into the water. As the crew rushed to grab rope to save them, it unfortunately became clear that we were already too late, for Bruce was already upon them. Within seconds, the surrounding area was filled with screams of terror as we were unable to do anything but watch in horror as our crewmates were dragged under the waves until there was nothing left to indicate they had been there to save for the sheer amount of blood left in their absence. The most we could do now is report their deaths, which is what we did. We couldn't tell their family the exact details about the thing that killed them, since we didn't even get a proper look at it. Even then, it's not like anyone we know will believe us without proper proof. And now, we're all left scared, with more questions than answers. As far as we're aware now, it's two major things. For one, the mysterious voice, wherever it's coming from, doesn't seem to be a threat to us. However, we still haven't identified where it comes from and why I'm the only one that can hear it. And even if benevolent, it worries me that I don't know its intentions with me. As for Bruce, it hasn't attacked since the shark cage incident, but that doesn't mean we don't know where it is. It's still appearing on the sonar, stalking the Amity from a safe distance, though since it seems quite injured from the cage, I'm not sure whether it's for our safety or its own. Not to mention that now all of us have occasionally seen its fin poking out of the water a distance away, not staying above water for long. All in all, this is going down as one of the scariest cases I've worked on with the Canadian Coast Guard. Heck, even as I'm typing this out, I'm still shaking. Right now, I can see Bruce through the porthole in my quarters, and I'm terrified at the thought of when it'll strike next. I just want to thank Queen of the Dead 2023 for allowing me to narrate that story. If you liked what you heard here, head over to their Reddit page and show them some love. I'll leave a link for the original story in the description below. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay tuned for one more nightmare.